Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the Masterclass Theatre. My name's Dave Guest. I've had the lovely job throughout the past couple of days of introducing a whole range of interesting, fascinating sessions. As you can see, I have a lovely panel up on stage with me here. We have got a traffic commissioner, an enforcer, and a lawyer. So they're going to be talking to you all about complying with the laws, the rules, the regulations that govern the transport industry. And obviously, we will give you a chance to some point to ask a few questions. But I think it's important first to hear from our panel, starting in the middle with Marion. Marion Kitson is Director of Enforcement at the DVSA. She leads teams who focus on improving compliance with road safety standards and regulations and leads on enforcement transformation. What's that to start off with?
So, enforcement transformation. So we are all about supporting the industry to be able to meet their obligations with all of the regulations. And you might think enforcement means about catching people out when something's gone wrong. That's the last thing we want to do. We want to be with you. We want to be supporting everybody to meet the regulations. And in fact, what we'd really like is even more operators in our earned recognition scheme. Our earned recognition scheme is the exemplars of road safety, and they are the operators that are working closely with us, meeting the standards, sharing their data, and making sure that they get it right. And they're delivering a great service for the contractors and for the customers that are using the services. So I wanted to talk a little bit about accessibility regulations. We are really interested in making sure, and we are doing more enforcement work now on making sure that anybody with a disability can travel independently, confidently, and with dignity when they are using public services, when they are getting on a bus or a coach, that they're able to travel safely and independently. And so we're trying to make sure that everybody has got all of the information that they need. So if you want to learn more about that, happy to answer some questions, but also come and see us on our stand. We've got plenty of these leaflets, and we'll be really happy to talk to you about how we can support you to meet those regulations, to make sure that we can support anyone who wants to travel safely on public transport.
How confident are you, Marion, that people are up to speed on what the regulations say and what's expected of them?
I think it's mixed, I'll be really honest with you. I think that there are a large number of operators who are due diligence. They are working really, really hard to understand the regulations and to meet the regulations. But it is an obligation that they need to meet. And so therefore, if they're not sure, this is where we can come in and help and support, because we want to make sure they understand what they need to do, and then they put the processes in place, the equipment in place, and that their drivers are really well trained to use that equipment.
I appreciate you're trying to do the education, you're trying to do the support, but what are you doing then for the ones who just, for whatever reason, still don't toe the line? What are you doing in terms of enforcement? So
one of the things that we launched earlier this year, back in May, was a way of contacting us. So there are a number of ways, obviously accessible for people with, for example, hearing impairments or visual impairments. You can get in touch with DVSA and let us know if something isn't right. If the way that you are trying to use public transport on a bus or a coach, you haven't been able to travel in the way that is comfortable for you, and we will follow that up. So we want to work with operators, but if things are not happening well, if they're not meeting their obligations, then we will take action, and my team will go out and we will find out what's gone wrong and help them to get it right.
Thank you. More from you as we go along, I'm sure. Miles Dorrington, Traffic Commissioner for West Midlands. Hello.
Hello, good afternoon.
Now, you've been doing some work particularly recently on drawing up ratings or creating a rating system for maintenance providers to make sure you get consistent standards in terms of those who maintain vehicles. Can you update us on where that's at?
Yes, I can. So a lot of you will be aware that the new Guide to Maintaining Roadworthiness came out last week. And if you're keen to see it, paragraph 5, it mentions the Maintenance Provision Rating Scheme, which myself and Traffic Commissioner Kevin Rooney have been on the active committee to set up and bring into practice. And we've brought together industry leaders and DFT and the traffic commissioners to draw up a voluntary rating scheme for maintenance providers on a bit of a star rating from 1 at the bottom to 5 at the top. And the idea of this is to fill in the gap within an industry, the PSV in particular, where nobody knows how good their maintenance provider is, what they've got to offer, and whether they will be there for them in the future when they expand and perhaps move into electric or alternatively powered vehicles. So the rating scheme sets up a banding. The first 2 stars are on a voluntary self-service basis. The remaining stars are on an assessment basis. And those star ratings will tell anyone what quality of both mechanic and facilities that maintenance provider has and their track record. And it gives operators some assurance that they're going to be using somebody who can be trusted and meet their needs. And those who are interested should log on to the Guide to Maintaining Roadworthiness at paragraph 5, follow the hyperlink, and get involved.
Now, presumably when drawing up these ratings, people will be following some kind of set guidance, because
Correct.
otherwise one person could say, oh, they're great, and the other person could say,
Correct.
not. So how's that going to be maintained?
So we worked with organisations such as ERTEC to devise a rating scheme that was both achievable and comparable to other rating schemes already in existence, for example, the ERTEC qualification, which would form part of the tiers 4 and 5. And the basis was that we drew up as the committee, bringing together industry, the trade organisations and DFT, the parameters of what would be required to meet those star ratings. Those star ratings can be reviewed, they can go up, they don't have to go down, and your rating will last for 3 years once you have it. But as I said, you may well think that you're in a higher scheme than you've been given and can apply to have it reassessed.
So those, when they come in, will last for 3 years. Any idea when this is actually going to come into force?
Yes, it's already been trialled and we're getting the data back from the trials. It's been enormously successful. We've had an oversubscription of interest from various operators and manufacturers, and the whole scheme is hoping to come live in early 2026.
Not too far off then.
Not too far off.
No. And Jonathan down at the end there from Backhouse Jones Solicitors, many years of experience in transport law. I think one of your bees in your bonnet at the moment is about the increasing expectations being heaped onto drivers.
I don't know whether I'm looking at it from that angle, actually. Something I've been considering all year, and we've been talking about all year at various events, is the accountability of drivers and the accountability of operators. I think we've spent probably the last 15 to 20 years blaming operators for a lot of activities where the original accountability actually sits with the driver. A very simple example of that is, of course, what we've been trying to do with regard to avoiding bridge strikes. And what we've developed over the last 6 or 7 years are more and more expectations on the operator to try and stop their drivers running into bridges. Now, there's probably a whole plethora of reasons why drivers run into bridges. But I think there's 2 really important facts that we must always consider. Number one, the driver's always accountable for the vehicle they're driving and the manner in which they drive it. Full stop, they're always accountable. So a professional driver must be aware of that, must be able to understand that expectation sits with them. But the second concern, the second issue is, are we, by effectively saying to operators, you must train, you must put extra GPS navigation systems in place, you must put maybe technical devices on that are going to tell them that they're approaching a low bridge, you must give them training on low bridges in the area, you must give them photographs, you must maybe give them route learning, so on and so forth, to try and prevent them running into a bridge. And then when they do hit a bridge, because they're not actually on the road that you thought they were going to be on because maybe there was a diversion or something else has put them onto a different route, it goes back on the operator. Well, it's your fault because you didn't predict that that might happen. And I wonder whether we're actually inadvertently saying to our drivers, it's not really your fault, it's the operators. Now, I know they hold drivers to account with driver conduct hearings, and they do, and drivers do have action taken against their vocational entitlement. But I wonder whether we're going too far, and what we should really be doing is, the starting point is, we all know, those of us who drive, all know that you have to read the road signs. And we all know you have to know the dimensions of the vehicle that you drive. And if you get that wrong, we all know it's your fault. And maybe that simplification of the message is maybe something that will develop the professionalism back into the driver, remind them of their accountability, remind them of their responsibility, and maybe stop operators getting so paranoid about the journey their driver might take that ultimately they're bombarding them with information systems and tech, which in reality is almost giving them an excuse for failure and forgetting that the actual lesson is read the road signage, know the dimensions of your vehicle, and avoid hitting the bridge.
But of course, the operators do have to take responsibility, as you say, for making sure they've got the tools to be able to do that, to have the knowledge and the training.
Absolutely right. I think we do have to be able to demonstrate as operators that we've decided that the driver is suitable to drive our vehicle and is appropriately trained for the type of journeys that they're going to take. But just think back, okay, those of you who are a little bit older than me, back in the 70s and the 80s, lots of drivers of goods vehicles, I'm going to use goods vehicles as an example because it's a good example, would have driven something called a flatbed. A flatbed is obviously a trailer with no sides on it, it's just a flatbed. The driver then had to load that trailer, had to then cover that load in tarp, and then had to it's called roping and sheeting. Okay, that was a real technical skill. Okay, those drivers were very good at it, and they were getting load distribution right, load security right, and load protection right, and they were doing it every time, or they were going to lose their job because they would damage the load. Now, today, we've got taut liners everywhere, loaded by other people, and so what we've got as the alternative, unfortunately, means we've taken away from the driver the skills that they had, and now we're trying to retrain it back in. So do we need to train drivers? Yes. So our bus or our coach driver does need to understand our expectations of them to make sure that they remember that they're driving large vehicles. But I don't think it should go as far as it's now going. I think what we're doing is forcing so many systems into play that drivers arguably don't even know where they sit in these systems. So, for example, bridge strikes, you can have alarms going off when you're going over a bridge because it's a proximity GPS-based alarm system. So the driver's inadvertently learning to ignore the alarm. Well, that's not helping the driver. Really, the driver shouldn't be thinking about an alarm. He should be thinking about the sign and what the sign says, and what he knows the vehicle height of the vehicle is. So I'm not saying the systems for training drivers can go. Yes, we've got to train our drivers, but I think we've also got to be careful we're not making it so safe that actually we're inadvertently de-skilling. And that, I think, is the core message.
Miles, as a traffic commissioner, do you have sympathy with what he's saying?
I do, actually. In the statutory documents, there's provision in Statute Document 10 Annex 4 for rogue drivers, and that I use that provision an awful lot when I look at the case in the rounds and see whether or not the operator had done all it could reasonably be expected to have done. And if they have, I'm satisfied, and I will take action just against the driver.
Right.
It's often the case in bridge strikes that we don't call the operator in. It's probably 4 out of 5 cases, it's only the driver that gets called in, because when we see the response to the bridge strike and the operator's investigation and the training they've given, we're satisfied they've done all they could reasonably have been expected to do, and that's the end of it.
That would seem to be a reasonable standpoint to take.
Well, it is a reasonable standpoint, and I think there's inconsistency across the UK on that standpoint, naming no names. But what I would say is, if we look at, say, coach drivers, and you wind the clock back to the 1960s and 70s, coach drivers almost lived with their coach. Their coach was part of them. They were proud of it. They had a real status with their coach. And I always compare drivers with airline pilots. Airline pilots sit very high in people's regard. We think that airline pilot is there to get us to our destination safely, and we respect that they do that, okay? Why don't we have the same regard to drivers? Is it because we've de-skilled our drivers, we've disrespected our drivers? Maybe that respect for drivers was there in the 50s, the 60s, even the 70s, maybe even the 80s, but maybe today that respect for the driver's role has got so watered down that they've almost become the lowest common denominator. So I'm actually protecting drivers here. I'm actually saying, as a society and as a representative body for the driving community, which obviously the coach and bus sector have a huge plethora of drivers out there, maybe we need to start building them back up, giving them a status that deserves the respect of what's a very challenging role. And so I actually think we should be rewarding drivers for doing it right and properly, and encouraging that level of aptitude that an airline pilot is assumed to have.
I'm just be interested actually on that point. Does anybody share Jonathan's view that the status of a driver, for want of a better phrase, has been diminished in recent time? I'll just come out to you with this, and you can say what you need. I'll hold it for you, okay?
Craig Hampton-Stone, I'm the Managing Director of Cardiff Bus. I'm quite new to the industry and new to the company, been there for just over a year, but I spend a considerable amount of my time doing employee recognition. We have a lot of customers that take the time to write in and compliment the standard of our drivers. Thankfully, the majority of the observations about opportunities to improve our service tend to be targeted towards the management of the company. But I think that on the whole, the 18 million passengers a year that we carry do seem to hold our drivers in very high regard.
And as part of your training, do you use that common sense approach that Jonathan's talking about to give them the basics of this is the size of the bus, this is what it will fit under, these are the limitations you're driving under?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a very well established and resourced training academy. Everything is done in-house. And interestingly, in the event of a requirement for disciplinary or incident or performance management, we take more of a view now that performance management and that HR process is about re-education and identifying where there is the opportunity to avoid the same thing happening again in the future, rather than punishing the driver. And if necessary, our drivers go back to the training academy for remedial training. So it is about getting the most out of the driver and avoiding a repetition of the incident, rather than simply punishing somebody.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to pick up any of that before I go back up there? All righty. Just talking about responsibilities, we've had a written question submitted by somebody who was maybe too shy to put it themselves. It says, as a director, I'm extremely busy, so can I delegate my responsibility for the transport operation to my transport manager and the staff supporting them if I'm satisfied they are fully competent? Who would like to maybe pick that one up? Perhaps you at the start, Miles?
Well, it's a very interesting question. The short answer is no. You can't delegate your responsibility as a director, because you're ultimately responsible for the general undertakings on the license. But you can delegate where you are constantly monitoring and supervising your staff to ensure that they're doing what they should be doing. And the mistake that I found in my line of work is that people rely on other people, on trust too much, and don't monitor and check what they're doing. And therefore, when it goes wrong, it's very difficult for that person to say, I had sufficient oversight to ensure they were doing their job properly. So the best way of dealing with that is to say, if I delegate my responsibility, can I properly monitor it? And if the answer is no, I think you should question whether you want to delegate that responsibility.
Just saying, oh, well, yeah, he's competent, he's a good guy, or he's a good person, it's just not good enough.
It's not enough, because you have the ongoing responsibility to ensure they're doing what they say they're doing. And that means proper checks and balances have to be in place with you, ensuring that you know that they've done it to the right standard.
One for you here, Marion, one again that's been submitted by somebody. It says the DVSA have the option to put an X marking on their prohibitions, which is the opposite of an S marking. This person says, I've found it to be very rare that the X mark is used, yet it must have the same validity. Many DVSA officers will tell a driver they would not have expected them to find the defect, for instance, a cut tyre or the inner wall, hence why we don't get that. Does that make sense to you?
I think, let me see whether I'm understanding that question properly. So the most serious faults that we find at the roadside, we will put an S-mark prohibition on them, and that means that we'll follow those up. So we want to talk to the operators. We want to find out what's gone wrong with their systems, because it's going back to the point that Miles made here about delegating responsibility. Let me use earned recognition as an example here. With earned recognition, we are looking for operators to have systems in place that ensure that all of those road safety obligations are being met. And they are providing us with data that evidences that on a regular basis. So actually, when we've got a problem, when we're seeing on the roadside something that has gone wrong and it's a serious defect, we want to speak to that operator and we want to find out whether it's a systemic problem, so actually is there something that's really gone wrong in the way that the operation is being run, or is it a one-off? And so therefore we want to really understand what the seriousness of that is. But I do want to say, so many of the faults that we find when we stop vehicles on the roadside could have been spotted with a really good walk-round check. And so we really do want to make sure that before a journey starts, that walk-round check is being undertaken thoroughly, and that if there is a problem, the vehicle is not going out, so that we can make sure that we are not picking up those serious faults at the roadside.
Because obviously the point is, if it's a dangerous defect, you might not see it before something terrible happens as a result of it.
Absolutely right. You know, I've got, a number of examiners that are out on the roadside every single day, but they are, I do not have an unlimited team. So we shouldn't be relying on enforcement activity, whether it be by my team or police or other agencies, to find problems. What we really need to do is to stop those issues happening in the first place, and that means checking vehicles before they go out on the road.
I know Jonathan wants to come in, but there's just one other thing I want to pick up on that with you, please. You were talking about walk-round checks. Is there an obligation to record, or for your drivers or whoever it is, to record they have done those checks every day? Should that data be available to say, yes, this vehicle was checked, or no, it was not checked?
I would like to see that happening all the time. Now the way that can happen, I've certainly seen, I've been with an operator recently, and they have a paper system. So they have a form, the operator, the driver walks around the vehicle and they are ticking it off on the form. I've seen apps being used. We're not going to be prescriptive, but we need to have evidence that that's taken place.
But it's not the law that they have to do that and prove they've done that.
It is an undertaking.
What's the difference? Now, the lawyer will explain. What's the difference between that, a law, and an undertaking?
Well, it's the promise the operator signed up to. And it says that drivers will record in writing their walk-round inspections, and they will be made available upon request. So it forms part of the general undertakings for maintenance. But the difference is it's not set in legislation, but a breach of it can be acted upon under the legislation.
Fine. Jonathan?
I think two things come out of that. First of all, I think when it comes to, I think the question talks about X-mark prohibition, didn't you say?
Yeah.
So an X-mark prohibition, which most people have never heard of, is a prohibition where the DVSA officer comes to the conclusion that this item would not normally have been spotted by, for example, a driver on a walk-round inspection, and wasn't obviously something that was missed on a previous maintenance inspection. A classic example would be a puncture on an inner of a twin wheel set that took place during that day. And I think what the question's asking, if I listen to it correctly, is we see S marking used because that's effectively a punishment. It's not a punishment, but it's an identification of a failure of an operator to operate their maintenance regime
something
safely.
They should have known, basically, yeah.
But the X marking is very, very rarely used. Now, some vehicle examiners do use it, but I would say I probably come across 20 or 30 S markings a year just in my caseload. X markings, 1. And yet, there's this plethora of prohibitions that sit in the middle that don't get S marked and don't get X marked. Where are they sitting? Either there might be significant failure of the maintenance system, which is X marking, or indicative of a significant failure of the maintenance system, or there isn't, which means, well, if there isn't, surely that should then lend itself towards an X marking. And I wonder whether there's a reluctance to just accept amongst people issuing the penalty, not the penalty, the prohibition, that actually it's fair to say that nobody should have spotted that. So they might be saying it orally to the driver at the roadside, but they're not putting it on the
They're concerned
form.
about committing themselves in black and white.
Well, it's going to make it easier for the traffic commissioner, because the traffic commissioner gets presented with half a dozen or a dozen PG9s over a couple of years, 1, 2 maybe S-marked, non-X marked. Where do all those others sit?
Yeah.
And so the operator will be saying, well, the driver couldn't have known about that. The DVS officer told him at the road. It was on the inside of an inner set. It was a cut that was only slight, but it did go through to the cords. And I would be saying, well, it should have been X marked. Well, it
Yeah.
should.
But
You know.
the problem with that is then you've got the commissioner's got to decide who's telling the truth because you've got nothing written down.
Well,
to
that's
prove
right.
it.
Yeah, exactly right.
Marion, I think you want to come in on that.
Yeah, so we are capturing all of the information when we are at the roadside. So any issue that we found with roadworthiness,
Yeah.
with the vehicle, we're capturing that. And actually, we are more and more relying on the data to inform the follow-up work that we do, because we know that we want to make sure that traffic commissioners are made aware of issues with operators. So actually we're capturing everything, and we're using our understanding and target-based risk approach to understand what follow-up work that we do. So there is a difference between the S and the X marking, I accept that, but all of that data is being captured, and all of that data is informing our approach and the operators that we're going to go and visit and ask questions of. And we have a varied way of doing that. So traditionally, and again, Jonathan's been talking about going back years, my teams were very used to, in previous years, going and visiting operators. That was the way that follow-up work always happened. It was a visit. And that's quite an onus on the business. It involves a lot of time by my team. Now we've got a mixed approach, and we are doing a lot more desk-based assessment. Now, we think that's really good for the industry. We think it's really good for the operators because it's less intrusive, but we can find out what's going on. So again, with those X-type marked offences, we can get in touch with the operator and say, we've seen this, what's going on? Tell us a little bit more about what's happening. And then I can direct my precious frontline resource to those more serious incidents. Then we're talking more about the S-Mart, where we can go in. So I think what we really want to say is we are using more and more data, more and more intelligence to inform the work that we do, because we want to make sure that operators can continue to deliver their business safely. We only want to get involved when there's something that is either a risk to road safety or where something has already gone wrong.
Miles, I think you want to just add to that.
Well, yes, I mean, prohibitions happen. The national average is quite a high percentage for prohibition rates. But there is the option and it's on the back of what used to be the paper prohibition notice, if you're unhappy with the prohibition for whatever reason, to write in to the manager. And I would say that those operators and drivers, through the operator, who feel that it was a prohibition that should be scored as an X, should at least make that effort so there's something in writing. Because, as Jonathan said, when it comes across my desk, if there has been that contemporaneous challenge with reasons given, I will, of course, take that as very compelling evidence and will give the operator the benefit of the doubt.
Good.
That's a great tip.
Anybody got anything that they want to ask about that particular issue out there that we've just been discussing? Yes, let me come to you. Oh, you don't need to, you can stay where you are. It's fine. I'll come to you. You can sit down. It's all right.
Well, I would just like to say, as a former traffic commissioner who had to actually engage with some prohibition markings, there were certain instances where actually, in the interest of the public and road safety for the public, I actually had to take a harsher view than some of the vehicle examiners, because there can get a complacency between the enforcement agency and the operators, because they're having day-to-day, hour-by-hour engagement. And one of the great things about traffic commissioner is I was not part of the enforcement agency, I was not part of the operator scheme, and so you actually could think about this like things like emergency exits, emergency doors. That was always a red flag to me, to see that. And so getting a contemporaneous account wouldn't necessarily have been enough for me because you always have to think beyond that to actually, how are we protecting the public, either the bus users or the other people in the operating environment of the vehicles. So I think and also I would also say that when an examiner who might be out in the wild winds of whatever and under time constraints to actually analyse what's happening with a particular prohibition, I think to encourage X marking actually may not be in the public interest, Jonathan. So I would actually, I would really encourage you away from that, because that's requiring a judgment at the roadside, which I don't think can necessarily be given and may serve to hide stuff that's been going on.
Okay, thank you very much. So,
Joan and I never agreed on anything, by the way. For 16 years of Joan being a traffic commissioner. The truth of the matter is, though, they're not very quick, but they have to carry out the same assessment on an S marking where they decide that there is an issue. So I think if you've got the function, use it. And that's the skill of a technical person. It's not the skill of a traffic commissioner to identify what defect a driver may or may not be able to see. So I would say you should encourage it, just to come back.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear the view of a current traffic commissioner on what the former traffic commissioner just said.
Yes,
to us.
the examples I was giving was where it's more obvious that it is something that neither the operator nor the driver could or should have been aware of. In relation to safety, absolutely, of course, I'd never stand in the way of that. But that, if it's something such as an emergency exit or missing hammers in a vehicle, should be obvious to a competent vehicle examiner and the appropriate marking given.
Yeah. Anything you want to add, Marion?
The main thing for me is that my teams on the side of the road are recording all of the information. So they're recording what they see, they're recording the issues that they're seeing with the vehicle, they are doing the driver's hours checks as well. Once we've got that information, we can build a picture of risk. And once we've built a picture of risk, we can take a proportionate response to that picture of risk. And we can support the compliant operators, and we can make sure that we can work with those that are not fulfilling their obligations.
I'll just come back on what Marion said there. I think one of the purposes of the S marking as well is it automatically triggers a face-to-face investigation. And that is the useful exercise where the operator, transport manager and DVSA can get to the actual bottom of what's happened.
Any more points on that before? Oh yes, I'll come to you, madam, at the back. Get me steps up today. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, sir. It's a sir. I do beg your pardon. I'll hold it for you, that's fine.
So my question really is about compliance with PSVAR. I've reported to Western traffic commissioners and to the unit vehicles that run with ramp defects. Instead of the vehicle going back into the appropriate route depot, they continue to run it, even with broken clips. And then I have to ask how much of that is checked in the morning run rounds. I'm a pasture rep, by the way, a number of local authorities in southwest England. And then the other issue is I often get onto PSVAR coaches, and we got a government where the main pillar, fifth pillar in the department is actually access with Louise Haig. So I make the point, how much often, there's a case going on, I welcome what you're doing in the West Country, I won't go into that in public, so how often do we get the ramps checked? And how often do your officers go out, ask them to pull the ramp and check? Or how often do you go and stop a Flix, National Express, Flix pre-compliant, but other operators and say, that's a wheelchair accessible registered service? How often are you there saying, I want to see that wheelchair ramp come up and down on a turnaround bus station. I want to prove that it's actually compliant. Because I can turn up anywhere, which you should have people in wheelchairs turning up anywhere, as the government, as the DFT's arm's length organisation, to make sure that I can just travel when I want to travel on the UK and into Ireland's public transport network. So I just asked the question. I'd like to see much more compliance of checks. And if a vehicle stays on the road, I won't name the operator.
Please
the vehicle
don't,
no, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do it. I'd say it properly, not publicly. That should they're big groups. They should not be on the road. It's a people united. They should be back in the garages. I just want to see more compliance of that, please.
I think there are sorry to
go
interrupt
on,
you.
go,
I think there are two really interesting points that he's made there, or two interesting questions. The first is, how much emphasis do your inspectors put on, or your examiners put on, checking disabled access ramps? And then his second point was, do you ever get people in wheelchairs to go out and check things as well?
So we do follow up on any reports, and so I mentioned at the very beginning that we launched in May a new portal for anybody to report any issues with accessibility on buses and coaches and public transport. So we have had, since that launch towards the end of May, we've had over 60 reports. And every single one of them gets looked at by my team. Every single one of them gets assessed. And then we will decide whether or not we visit that particular operator or whether we contact them. And I mentioned before the desk-based assessment, the opportunity that we've got for a team working remotely to get in touch quickly, because that can happen much more efficiently, and find out, explain what we've been told, and follow that up and understand what that is. But when my teams do go out, they will check that equipment. Now, of course, we have to be really aware when we are stopping buses and coaches that if there are passengers on board, that creates a big challenge for everybody. So we tend not to stop vehicles that have got passengers on board in the middle of a journey. We will try and make our checks when those vehicles don't have passengers on board. So at the end of a journey, those types of things. But we absolutely welcome reports from any passengers to tell us about things that are not working properly, because we want to understand what the problem is with the operator. If it's the physical equipment on the coach, then that's a roadworthiness issue, and my trained vehicle examiners will be checking that. If it's the use of the vehicle, of the equipment, then that could be both, couldn't it? It could be driver training requirement, it could be something that needs to be fixed on the vehicle. And of course, we also want to make sure that drivers feel well trained and confident to support passengers, because when passengers want to use the equipment or want to come onto the service, we want to make sure that the driver feels really confident to support that person to travel with dignity. So we are becoming more and more proactive, directly proactive with those operators, and we will go and visit them, and we are visiting them, and when we do visit them, we will and can check the equipment with my trained examiners involved.
So, just to be clear, they're giving as much importance to checking that equipment as they are to checking the tyres, to checking
Absolutely.
other aspects of the vehicle in terms of road safety. Then his other question was, is there ever a sort of testing scheme that involves people, wheelchair users, who obviously are the experts on whether these things are working properly?
We haven't been doing that up until now, but we recognise it might be something that would be helpful, and we would be we were very welcome to speak to. We're working with different groups and different types of disabilities. We're working with visually impaired disabled groups at the moment to understand what their specific needs are and really work together to see what we can do to support. So we would absolutely happily work with groups to see what we can do and see what help we can. But we want to make sure when we're checking those vehicles that that equipment works.
I just want to come back to that, chap, and just ask one thing. When you said you'd reported the problems, and again, don't name the company, please, but did you report it to the company or to any other body?
No, to the Commissioner and to the Licensing Authority. No, they're ongoing, so you're on it.
Oh, right, okay.
But yes, we do report it to the company, but belt and brace your email, bang, it goes there as well, because it is a serious compliance issue for a disabled person.
Yeah.
One of the operators in the room is very good, sitting beside me in the West Country when he's rolling patients. But and we do go out for another bit of DFT. I go out for another bit of DFT, and I check rail replacement vehicles for PSVAR through a company that DFT is a contractor. Both two of us in this room do. But we don't do it for you, and you should be doing it like your rail division does.
Yeah.
I'm more than happy to talk to you. We've got the stand here, or we'll come and talk after the session.
Okay.
That'd be great, yes. And she is saying they do want to hear from people, so they'll be acting on that. I'm sure you'll absolutely be acting on that. It's no use saying, oh, tell us all your issues, if you then just stick them in a drawer and do nothing with them.
No, every single report gets looked at by a member of my team.
Okay. Any other questions from... Yes, I'll come down here. Hello, is it he or she, your dog? She. Lovely. What's she called? Lizzie. Lizzie, right. Would you like to ask your question, please? I'll hold that for you, if that's okay.
Do you mind if I?
No, that's fine.
Thank you. So I've got thanks, Sam. A question half for Marion and half for Miles, I think. So Marion mentioned that accessibility is key, and it's something that's high on the list of priorities recently. And forgive me for my scepticism, but for full clarity, I'm a senior engagement manager for a large national sight loss charity called Thomas Pocklington Trust. We've heard it a lot for a long time, and we're still here. So the first part of my question, I suppose, is how are the DVSA, along with the DFT and other stakeholders, going to ensure that accessibility isn't a nice to have, like it has been for so many years, and it becomes policy rather than guidance? So that's my first arm. And then the second one to Miles. So I work quite closely with Transport for West Midlands and the Combined Authority on lots of different projects. We've had lots of conversations today how getting from point A to point B as someone, so I'm registered severely sight impaired and have hearing loss, is very challenging. But quite often, once you've got on the bus, a lot of the problems have already been before that point. So as commissioners, how are you going around things like floating bus stops, for examples, and shared spaces that are extremely dangerous for the disabled community, ensuring that the transport or the route from point A to point B is more integrated and not just once you've got on the bus, it's the driver's responsibility?
Okay, thank you. So if perhaps, Marion, if you'd like
Yeah.
to answer that first question first, and then we'll come to Miles.
So I mentioned before the leaflets that we've been working on, because we really do believe this is a really big education piece. So this is about making sure that everybody understands what their obligations are, and that everybody who wants to travel knows what help they should expect to receive. So it's both sides of the equation. And so what we're doing now is because we've got that portal so that we can get notification of where things haven't been working well with those accessibility regulations, and of course the additional regulations that are very supportive for visually impaired passengers in terms of the information. So whether that be the details of the route and where the bus is, and the verbal notifications as well. All of those need to be in place so that when passengers get onto the bus, that they are able to be supportive, they can make that journey independently. That's really, really important. But I agree with you on the joined up side of it. So what we're trying to do is, where we know that something hasn't gone well, we'll work with that operator to find a way to fix it, because we really want to make sure that and we will build up our understanding by working with those operators. So if we see something that we're hearing about regularly, then we can work with organisations like CPT to go out across the industry and say, this is quite a big problem. This is an area that we're not doing well on as an industry. How can we work together to support drivers to be able to offer this support confidently and consistently that passengers need? The point around the integration, this is something that DFT and our Secretary of State is passionate about. And so I do believe that there is more that we can do to understand that A to B element, because the bit of getting onto the bus is important, but it's only part of the journey.
Miles, I think you perhaps want to pick up there.
Yes, I do, because I've been quite vocal that passengers come front and centre in the West Midlands at every point of their journey. And I would encourage anyone who's struggling on any part of their journey, for whatever reason, to write to the operator who's responsible, and to either write courteously or by the complaints procedure, in the same way that people used to do, not so much now, for untimely bus services. Because ultimately, we can only, as traffic commissioners, work off evidence. And unless we have evidence that's brought before us, we can't bring someone to account at a public inquiry or a preliminary hearing if it's not so serious. So we work with the DVSA, who gather, as enforcement, the evidence that's then presented to us, and a decision is then made to bring them in. I have not yet had an accessibility case. I look forward to the first one, because I can safely say that if there is any deliberate intent to get round the regulations, or are turning a blind eye to them, I'm very happy to be the first traffic commissioner to come down hard. And I will come down hard if it's proportionate to do so. Because I go back to what I said, passengers front and centre for safety and for a timely service. It's as simple as that.
And would you welcome people when they are making their suggestions, complaints, whatever it is, to the operator, to copy you in on that,
Absolutely.
on that email so that you
Absolutely.
know what's going on?
Yes, and that will go to one of my managers in the office who will oversee that. And it then gives us an opportunity, if we think something has been raised that requires further investigation by the DVSA or whomever, to pass it to them, because it carries a bit more weight sometimes coming from my office. So that's something I would encourage as well.
Okay, and very briefly, Jonathan, because we're nearly out of time, but if you just want to make a
Yeah,
final
no
point.
problem at all. I think just one aspect of reassurance arising out of your question, it is the law, it is policy, it's not a nice to have. It may not be the experience you're all receiving, but it is legally obliged for operators to comply. There are some exemptions for some operators, for some vehicles, for a period of time, because the original the original integration of it was messed up, is for want of a better phrase, in spite of the fact there were a long number of years when we could have got ready for it. But it is black and white, it is the law. They do have to be compliant, the vehicles do have to have the appropriate working equipment. So that should be at least some reassurance that this journey's on its way and it's not going to stop.
No, and when a law's there, it's up to you guys to enforce it.
Law's the law.
Exactly. Well, we've run out of time, as ever we do, but thank you very much indeed to our panellists. Thanks to all of you for coming and making your contributions. I hope you found the session useful. I've certainly learned a lot this. So thank you very much indeed. Our next
you.
session, I think, is about
Thank you,
half past,
everyone.
but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.